The palace had many rooms, but there was one space no one liked to enter anymore. It was quiet, cold, and untouched. The walls still held images from another time when laughter echoed and hope felt close. At the center of that space was a tall window that looked toward the stars. The queen stood there often, her back straight, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the sky. She had stood in that same spot for many years. Everyone knew why. The princess had never come back. Years ago, the princess was sent away on a peaceful mission. She was young, but brave, curious about other worlds, and eager to learn. The elders believed this journey would prepare her to one day rule. Earth was meant to be simple. A short visit, a friendly exchange. Nothing dangerous. Something went wrong. The ship lost contact during its return flight. At first, the palace believed it was a signal delay. Then days passed. Then weeks. Search teams were sent across nearby systems. Messages were broadcast again and again. There was no reply. Only silence. The council eventually declared the princess lost. The queen never agreed. She listened as officials spoke in careful voices. She watched as ceremonies were held to honor the missing. She allowed the banners to be lowered. But in her heart, she refused to accept that her grandchild was gone forever. No body had been found. No final message received. To the queen, that meant hope still lived. Time moved on, whether she wanted it to or not. The empire faced growing tension. Old rivals began testing borders. Resources became scarce. Trust between systems weakened. The queen was forced to rule with strength even while carrying quiet grief. To her people, she was firm and calm. Alone, she was something else entirely. At night, she replayed memories. She remembered the princess as a child, running through the gardens, asking endless questions about the stars. She remembered how the princess would sit beside her and listen to stories of ancient rulers, not out of duty, but out of genuine interest. She remembered the way the princess smiled before boarding the ship, confident and excited. Unaware it would be the last time they saw each other. The room remained untouched because the queen could not bring herself to change it. No one dared suggest it. Far away, on a small blue planet, life moved very differently. The princess had survived the crash. She woke up in pain, surrounded by broken metal and smoke, on land she did not recognize. Her body was weak. Her communicator was destroyed. Her ship beyond repair. She had been trained for many things, but not for this. She was found by a human. At first, she feared him. Earth was unfamiliar. Humans were unknown beyond research files and distant observation, but he did not raise his voice. He did not ask questions she could not answer. He brought her water. He stayed until she could stand. She chose to hide the truth. To survive, she learned how to live as a human. She copied their ways, their speech, their routines. The man helped her without knowing who she truly was. Over time, trust grew. Fear softened. Loneliness faded. She thought often of the queen. She believed the empire would find her. She waited for signs, for ships in the sky, for signals in the stars. None came. As months turned into years, reality settled in. If she was to live, it would be here. Back in the palace, rumors spread. Some whispered that the princess had chosen to disappear. Others claimed she had betrayed the empire. Political enemies used her absence as a weapon, questioning the queen's leadership. Each word cut deep, but the queen never responded publicly. She carried herself with quiet dignity, but alone. She spoke to the stars. She asked questions with no answers. She wondered if her grandchild was afraid, if she was hurt, if she still remembered home. The queen told herself that as long as she could still imagine the princess breathing somewhere, hope remained. The war grew closer. Rival forces began moving openly. Defense meetings became daily. The queen aged under the weight of responsibility and loss. Still, she refused to name a successor. Many believed it was stubborn pride. In truth, it was faith. She believed the princess would return. On Earth, the princess watched her own children sleep. They looked human. They sounded human. But sometimes small things happened. Objects moved slightly when emotions ran high. Lights flickered without reason. The children asked questions about stars they had never studied. The princess knew time was running out. She had built a life. She had built a family. But the past was not done with her. One night, she saw something in the sky she had not seen in years. A familiar pattern of light. A signal she never expected to recognize again. Her heart raced. Fear and relief collided. The Empire was searching again. Back at the palace, an ancient system reactivated. Long-range sensors picked up a trace thought impossible. Weak but real. A signature linked to the lost mission. The queen stood slowly from her seat. For the first time in years. Her hands trembled. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply whispered one word, alive, and somewhere between two worlds. A return was beginning. The princess had learned how to move quietly through a world she did not know. Each step had to be careful. Each word had to sound normal. Earth was strange, loud, unpredictable, and yet full of small kindnesses that no one in her world had ever mentioned. People smiled for no reason. Birds sang in the morning. Rain fell without warning, soaking the streets and leaving everything clean. It was simple, yet complex in its own way. The man who had found her stayed close. He did not ask her name at first. He did not question her story. He simply made sure she could breathe, eat, and survive. Over time, he became her friend, her guide, and eventually her partner. She never imagined she could feel such trust for a human, yet every day proved it. She watched how he treated people, how he laughed at small jokes, and how he cared without expecting anything back. She could see why he had been chosen to help her survive. Together, they built a home. It was small, modest, and safe. The princess studied the human way of life, learning to cook simple meals, manage money, and communicate without revealing her true nature. She was careful around neighbors, careful in the market, careful in every place where a mistake could be discovered. Every day felt like balancing on a thin line, yet she also felt alive in a way she had not in years. Life was not easy. Simple tasks could feel impossible. Walking through crowded streets, avoiding suspicious eyes, even learning the slang of the humans was a challenge. But the princess remembered the lessons of her youth: patience, observation, and quiet strength. She grew stronger in ways the palace had never taught her. The first child was born on a clear night, with stars stretching across the sky in patterns she remembered from home. The princess held the baby close and felt warmth she had not known in years. The child's small hands wrapped around hers. Tiny fingers and a tiny heartbeat reminded her that life could continue, even after loss. The second child followed 2 years later, bringing joy and worry in equal measure. Both children were vibrant, curious, and sometimes mischievous, always asking questions that required careful answers. Sometimes they would look up at the stars and ask things they could not yet explain, and the princess would feel a pang of recognition. They were more than human, and she knew it. She taught them quietly, carefully. She showed them how to be kind, how to observe the world, and how to hold their secrets close. She could not tell them about the palace, about the war, about her real life. That knowledge was dangerous. But she told them stories of faraway lands, of brave people, of worlds they could imagine. She filled their hearts with wonder, so that curiosity could grow without fear. The man remained her anchor. He was patient when she worried too much, protective when she felt threatened, and steady when the children tested their limits. They became a family, a real family. The kind of life she had dreamed of, even if it was far from the stars. Still, she never forgot the palace. Every night she would look at the sky and wonder if anyone was watching. She wondered if the queen still waited for her. She wondered if the empire had moved on, or if they still remembered her name. She wondered if returning was possible, or if she would have to live in hiding forever. These thoughts haunted her, but they also gave her purpose. She could not let fear control her. Life on Earth had its own challenges. The children would sometimes exhibit abilities that startled the princess. Objects moved slightly when emotions ran high. Strange lights appeared and disappeared. Once, a storm outside seemed to respond to the children's laughter, the winds calming as they played. She knew these signs meant they were different, that part of her own world lived in them. She worried, knowing that if humans discovered the truth too early, it could endanger everything. Yet she also understood that this was natural. They were her legacy. The children asked questions about the stars, the planets, and faraway places. They were not satisfied with simple answers. They wanted to know why some nights the stars seemed brighter than others, why some objects moved strangely, why they felt different from other children. The princess would smile and guide them with gentle stories, avoiding the details that could reveal too much. She encouraged curiosity, but taught caution. She hoped that when the time came, they would understand. The man noticed the small signs too. Sometimes he would see objects shift or lights flicker. At first he was confused. Then he began to sense the connection between the children and the woman he loved. He did not fear it. Instead, he accepted it as part of the world they now lived in. He became their protector in a way he could not have imagined. He would face challenges without complaint because the family mattered more than anything. For years, this life continued. Days were filled with chores, school, small adventures, and quiet evenings. Nights were for stories, for comforting, for holding each other close. The princess sometimes felt torn, longing for her home in the palace and her queen. She wanted to return, but she feared the consequences. The empire would not understand a human family. They would not forgive the years lost. She wondered if her grandchildren, born on Earth, could ever be accepted. Could the empire see them as part of her legacy, or would they be seen as a threat? One evening, while watching the sunset with her children, a strange feeling settled over her. The sky seemed different. The air felt charged. She could not explain it. Something was changing. It was subtle, but undeniable. She held her children close and whispered that everything would be all right. Even though her own heart raced with uncertainty, the man noticed the change too. He knew something important was approaching, though he could not say what. Together, they prepared quietly. They could not know what form it would take, but they could protect their family. They had survived before. They could do it again. In the palace far away, the queen never stopped watching the sky. Each day she checked the stars, listened for signals, and prayed in her own way. Time had aged her, softened some of her edges, but it had not dimmed her hope. She still believed her grandchild was alive. She still believed the story was not finished. And she knew, deep in her heart, that if the princess returned, everything could change. The empire moved cautiously. Allies were consulted. Scouts were sent. Long-range sensors were adjusted to detect even the faintest trace. Every official knew the history. Every advisor remembered the missing princess. Few dared speak of hope aloud, but the queen never wavered. She knew that if her grandchild survived, the world would see it one day. Back on Earth. The princess felt the pull of her home more strongly than ever. She looked at her children, at the man who had become her partner, and felt the weight of choices. To return meant risk, danger, and exposure. To stay meant safety, but distance from her past. Her heart ached for both worlds. The children played in the yard, laughing, chasing one another, unaware of the questions their mother carried. Their innocence was a balm. Their presence reminded the princess why life mattered, why hope mattered, and why she must be brave. She promised herself she would not fail them, and so life continued, a delicate balance between two worlds. The princess lived with love, with fear, and with a quiet determination. The children grew, unaware of the full truth, but touched by its presence. The man remained steadfast, a silent guardian. And far away, the queen waited, her heart still reaching across the stars, knowing that one day, the story of the missing princess would unfold again, and the world would never be the same. The day the ship appeared, no one at the palace expected it to be real. It had been decades since the princess disappeared. Messages had gone unanswered, search teams had failed, and the empire had accepted her absence, at least publicly. But now, a craft appeared on the outskirts of the system. damaged but intact, and its signature unmistakable. The palace alarmed immediately. The queen was summoned to the command room, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. The ship moved slowly, guided by what little power it had left. It seemed to hesitate, as if unsure of what awaited it. Inside the craft, the princess held the hands of the human man beside her. The children sat quietly, sensing tension, but unaware of its full meaning. They had never seen their mother act with such caution. Every movement was deliberate, every glance careful. This was not just a return, it was a risk. The palace scrambled. Guards prepared weapons. Officials debated protocols. The council demanded answers, but no one knew what to expect. The queen walked through the corridors, her staff parting automatically. Her heart raced. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. But nothing could prepare her for the sight of the craft descending, its lights flickering like a heartbeat. When the princess stepped onto the palace grounds, the world seemed to stop. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. She was older, changed by years of life on another world, but unmistakably the princess they had lost. Her hair was longer, slightly streaked with silver, and her eyes carried a depth of experience that the young version of herself could not have imagined. Her gown, simple and human-made, shimmered faintly under the palace lights, hinting at something more than earthly fabric. The queen froze. She wanted to speak, to run, to embrace, and yet she could not. Her lips moved slightly, whispering words no one else could hear. My grandchild. The human man bowed slightly, his expression calm but respectful. He held the children's hands firmly, signaling that they would not be separated. The children, sensing the tension, clung to their mother, their wide eyes taking in the grand palace, the armed guards, and the crowd that had gathered. They did not understand what was happening, but they felt the seriousness of the moment. The council demanded the princess explain herself immediately. They wanted to know why she had disappeared, where she had been, and how a human had become part of her life. Questions poured out in rapid succession, some polite, some accusatory, some tinged with fear. The princess stood tall, her calm presence commanding attention. She began to speak. She told them of the crash of waking up on an unknown planet and of the human who had saved her life. She explained how she had learned to survive, how she had adapted to a world that was not hers, and how she had eventually built a family. Her voice was steady, but the emotion underneath was undeniable. She spoke of the children, of their innocence, and of the strange abilities that occasionally appeared. Hinting at their mixed heritage without revealing dangerous details, the council murmured among themselves. Some could not believe the story. Others were shocked, unsure how to respond. A few grew angry, seeing a human in their sacred palace, questioning the legitimacy of the children. The debate grew heated, the tension thick in the air. The queen stepped forward, silencing the room with her voice alone. She looked at her grandchild, then at the human man, and finally at the children. "Are these my grandchildren?" she whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and hope. The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. The princess nodded slowly, tears forming but held back. She wanted the queen to understand, to see that her family was not a threat, but a continuation of the lineage she had once protected. The human man remained calm, his eyes steady on the queen. He did not speak immediately, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. Some council members protested. They cited law, tradition, and precedent. They demanded that the children be tested, that the human be removed. The princess explained why she had involved herself with a human at all. Others spoke quietly, suggesting that perhaps this was fate, that perhaps the return of the princess with a human family could bring new understanding between worlds. The queen remained silent, watching her grandchild. She saw the lines of hardship on her face, the resilience in her eyes, and the love radiating from the children. She understood that this was not a betrayal. This was survival, adaptation, and courage. Slowly, the atmosphere began to change. The guards lowered their weapons slightly. Some council members nodded, seeing the truth in the queen's gaze. The humans were not dangerous. The children were innocent. The princess had returned not as a fugitive, but as a mother and a leader in her own right. The queen approached carefully. Each step was measured, deliberate. When she finally reached the princess, she extended her hands. The princess took them without hesitation. Tears flowed freely as they embraced. The children watched, sure of the ritual, but feeling the warmth and love between the two figures. The human man remained at their side, quietly respectful. He did not attempt to intrude, but his presence was undeniable. He had saved the princess once, and now he stood as a guardian for the family, silently earning a place in a world that had once seemed impossible to enter. The palace slowly returned to order, but the tension lingered. The story of the missing princess was no longer one of loss, but of return, of courage, and of love. The council realized that the empire faced a new reality, a bridge between two worlds. Represented in the princess and her family, the queen spoke again, this time addressing the council. She emphasized that blood was not only a matter of tradition, but also of survival and legacy. She reminded them that the children were part of the lineage, that the human man had protected and nurtured the princess, and that this family could help the empire in ways they could not yet imagine. Some were persuaded. Others remained skeptical. The debate continued, but the initial shock began to settle. The princess, standing tall, remained calm. She had prepared for this moment, and she would face whatever challenges came next with strength. That evening, family stayed together in a private chamber. The queen sat with the children, holding their small hands and whispering words of welcome and love. The princess watched, her heart full. The human man sat quietly, sensing the importance of the moment but allowing the bonds to form naturally. The palace was forever changed. The return of the princess was not just a reunion. It was a moment that shifted perspectives, challenged tradition, and opened the possibility of a future where differences could be bridges instead of barriers. The children, unaware of the full weight of history, played quietly, bringing life and hope to halls that had known only silence. The princess looked out at the night sky once more, feeling the pull of both worlds. She knew challenges lay ahead, that not everyone would accept her family, that dangers remained. But for the first time in decades, she felt a sense of completion. She had returned. She had survived. She had brought back the next generation. And somehow, against all odds, hope had returned with her. The day after the princess returned, the palace was buzzing with tension and curiosity. Word of her return spread quickly, and everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Some saw her as a hero who had survived impossible odds. Others saw a threat. How could a human man be allowed near the royal family? How could children born on another world be considered part of the lineage? Questions and doubts filled the air. The council called a meeting. The room was large, with tall windows letting in sunlight, but the mood was heavy. Advisors whispered in corners. Guards stood at attention. The queen entered last, her presence commanding silence. She had spent years preparing for this moment, though nothing could fully prepare her for what lay ahead. The council began with questions. They asked the princess why she had taken a human into her life. They asked about the children, their abilities, and their loyalty to the empire. Some demanded proof that she was indeed the princess. Others worried that her time on Earth had changed her, made her vulnerable, or worse, made her a traitor. The questions came fast and sharp, meant to confuse, intimidate, and challenge. The princess stood calmly. Her posture was firm, her voice steady. She told them the truth, carefully choosing words that explained survival, love, and responsibility. She described the crash, the human who had helped her, and the years spent raising 2 children in safety. She explained that her children were part of her, carrying her heritage, even if they had the appearance of humans. She admitted that they sometimes exhibited abilities that seemed strange to Earthlings, but that she had guided them to control and understand these powers. A murmur ran through the council. Some could not believe the story. Others began to see the logic. The human man, standing beside the princess, did not speak at first. When he did, his words were calm and respectful. He told them that he had acted out of love and duty. He had no agenda except to protect the princess and her children. His honesty and calm presence impressed some council members, though others still mistrusted him. The queen listened to all of this in silence. She could see the concern on the council members' faces, the confusion, the fear, and the hope. She knew that they had to accept the truth, even if it challenged tradition. Slowly, she spoke. She reminded them that the Empire's strength had always come from resilience, intelligence, and unity. Bloodlines mattered, yes, but so did survival, courage, and loyalty. She argued that the children, though part human, were still her grandchildren and deserved protection, respect, and recognition. The council was divided. Some continued to insist that the human must be removed and the children tested. Others argued that testing would be cruel and unnecessary. The princess offered a compromise. She suggested that the children demonstrate their abilities in controlled conditions, showing that they were not a threat, but potential assets. This idea gave pause to many of the advisors. If the children could be trained, guided, and understood, they could serve as bridges between worlds. The first test was simple. The children were asked to focus on moving objects slightly with concentration alone. At first, they hesitated, unsure of how the humans in the room would react. But under their mother's gentle encouragement, small movements began. Papers fluttered, a cup shifted, and a faint light flickered. The council watched in awe and fear. The children were not dangerous. They were extraordinary. Their mother had nurtured their gifts with care, teaching them responsibility and empathy. The princess explained each step, describing how she had guided the children since birth, how she had ensured they understood the consequences of their actions, and how she had trained them to respect life in all forms. She emphasized that their powers were not weapons, but extensions of themselves, could be used to help the Empire rather than harm it. Slowly, the council's tension began to shift. Though some remained skeptical, the human man spoke again, offering to demonstrate his loyalty and willingness to follow the Empire's rules. He promised that he would never interfere with the royal duties or decisions. His calm and honest words helped many see that he was not a threat. He had loved the princess for her courage, intelligence, and kindness, and his presence was proof of loyalty rather than rebellion. Still, not all were convinced. The princess had to confront some council members directly, answering accusations of disloyalty, poor judgment, and even betrayal. She remained calm, acknowledging their concerns, but refusing to be intimidated. She reminded them that survival had required difficult choices, that love had guided her decisions, and that every step she had taken had been to protect her family and ensure the future of the lineage. The queen finally spoke again, her voice carrying authority. She addressed the council with a clarity that demanded respect. She declared that the princess had proven her loyalty, that the human had shown integrity, and that the children, despite their mixed heritage, were part of the royal line. The queen emphasized that tradition was important, but survival, courage, and love were equally essential. The future of the empire depended not only on adherence to old rules, but on understanding, adaptation, and compassion. Some council members resisted, but the queen's words could not be ignored. Slowly, agreement grew. The human man was officially recognized as a protector of the royal family. The children were acknowledged as part of the lineage, with rights, privileges, and responsibilities. The princess was welcomed back not only as a survivor, but as a mother and leader who had bridged two worlds. The princess felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Years of fear, hiding, and uncertainty began to fade. She could finally stand openly, with her family at her side, without worrying that their existence was a threat. The children played quietly, sensing acceptance and safety in a way they had never felt before. The human man remained calm, proud, and protective. That night, the family gathered in a private chamber. The queen joined them, sitting with the children, listening to their laughter, and watching as they interacted with their mother and guardian. For the first time in years, the queen felt hope not as a distant dream, but as a living reality. The princess looked at the queen, gratitude and love in her eyes, understanding the depth of trust and acceptance that had been given in the quiet moments. The princess reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had survived, adapted, and thrived. She had built a life of love and courage in a world far from her own. She had returned to the palace not as a victim, but as a leader, a mother, and a symbol of resilience. The children, born of two worlds, represented a future that was both promising and challenging. The queen understood the significance too. She saw that the empire could no longer be constrained by fear or rigid tradition. It needed to embrace change, to recognize the power of love, courage, and loyalty. The princess's return, with her human husband and children, was not just a reunion. It was a lesson for the empire. Strength could come from understanding, and hope could thrive even in the most unexpected places. The council agreed to ongoing guidance and support for the family. Advisors were assigned to help the princess integrate her family fully into palace life. Guards were instructed to protect them without intrusion. Teachers were prepared to nurture the children's unique abilities, ensuring they grew into their full potential. The empire began to accept a new reality, one that honored the past but embraced the future. As the night deepened, the princess looked out at the stars once more. She thought of Earth, of the human man, of her children, and of the palace that had shaped her. She realized that life was no longer about survival alone. It was about love, family, and bridging worlds that had seemed impossible to connect. She smiled, knowing that challenges remained, but also knowing that together they could face whatever came next. The children slept soundly. Unaware of the political and emotional storms that had raged in the palace that day, they dreamed, free and safe, carrying the promise of two worlds within them. The human man sat quietly, watching over them, grateful for the trust that had been placed in him. The princess held the queen's hand briefly, silent acknowledgement of everything they had endured and the future that awaited. In that quiet moment, hope was alive. Love had returned, and the family, once separated by impossible odds, was finally whole. The days that followed were filled with change, learning, and cautious optimism. The palace had never felt so alive, yet so uncertain. For decades, the halls had echoed with strict orders, formal ceremonies, and whispers of fear and protocol. Now laughter returned, soft but persistent, coming from corners where it had long been absent. The children played, exploring rooms they had only glimpsed from the main corridors. They were curious, brave, and entirely unaware of the storm of history that had preceded them. The queen watched quietly, often from the tall windows that overlooked the gardens. She saw the children chase sunlight, chase shadows, and sometimes chase one another across the marble floors. Their laughter reminded her of the princess as a child, full of life, full of curiosity. The queen realized that despite differences in species, upbringing, and culture, there was something universal in the joy of children, the spark that made life worth protecting. The princess and her human husband settled into their roles. The princess resumed ceremonial duties, but on her own terms. She insisted that the palace honored traditions while also allowing space for compassion and understanding. The human man became a respected figure, known for his calm intelligence and dedication. Guards and advisors came to see that he was not a threat, but a steadfast protector and ally. Slowly, acceptance grew. Every day, small challenges arose. Some advisors struggled with the idea that the children, part human and part alien royalty, could carry the future of the empire. They questioned decisions, worried about appearances, and fretted over what outsiders might think. But the queen and the princess handled each situation with patience. They emphasized that love, loyalty, and courage were more important than rigid tradition, and that the children's uniqueness was a strength, not a weakness. The children began lessons to understand their abilities. Guided carefully by teachers who had been briefed on their heritage, they learned to control small movements, focus energy, and use their powers responsibly. The princess encouraged them gently, teaching through play and storytelling. It's always emphasizing ethics, empathy, and patience. The human man participated, helping them ground themselves, teaching balance and fairness. Their training was not just about skill. It was about understanding their identity and their place in two worlds. Despite the challenges, moments of joy multiplied. The princess and her children would wander the palace gardens, observing the plants, insects, and stars. The children asked endless questions, their curiosity a reflection of their mother's own youthful spirit. She answered them carefully, not hiding truth, but framing it in ways they could understand. She wanted them to grow wise, compassionate, and strong, ready for a future that could be uncertain. One evening, as the family sat together watching a meteor shower, the Queen joined them. The sky was filled with streaks of light, brief and brilliant. She held the children's hands and told them stories of the stars, of ancestors who had looked at the same sky and dreamed of connection and peace. The children listened, enraptured, sensing that the woman who held their hands was as important as any story they had ever heard. The princess smiled quietly. This was the moment she had imagined in her dreams. The two worlds she loved intertwined, understanding growing where fear had once reigned. The human man watched silently, pride and relief mingling in his expression. He had risked everything to protect this family, and now, against all odds, they were whole. Word of the princess's return and the children's acceptance spread across the empire. Distant systems took note, some with curiosity, others with cautious respect. Allies saw the potential for new understanding and cooperation, while old rivals watched, calculating. The Queen handled diplomacy with grace, using her grandchild's story as an example of resilience and unity. It was clear that the empire was changing, slowly, subtly, and that the future would be shaped not only by power, but by compassion. The children grew quickly, their abilities becoming more refined. They learned not just control, but empathy, using their skills to assist in small ways, moving objects to help workers, calming frightened animals, and even adjusting minor systems in the palace to improve efficiency. People began to see them as more than children. They were symbols of a new era. They represented what could happen when courage, love, and understanding triumphed over fear. The princess and her human husband continued to live simply despite their surroundings. They did not indulge in luxury or privilege beyond necessity. They focused on the children's upbringing, their well-being, and their integration into the empire's life. Their example inspired others to reconsider old prejudices, to see that family and loyalty were more important than appearance or origin. Over time, the palace atmosphere shifted completely. Where tension and suspicion had once ruled, warmth and curiosity now flourished. Guards relaxed, council members debated ideas with less fear, and servants moved about with renewed energy. The princess's story had not only reunited a family, it had transformed an institution. The empire was beginning to understand that strength could come from difference, that unity could be forged in ways no one had imagined. The Queen watched the princess teach her children one afternoon. They were sitting in the library, small hands reaching for books, eyes wide with fascination. The princess explained the stories carefully, connecting lessons from the past to ideas of compassion, strategy, and courage. The Queen felt pride swell in her chest. She realized that her grandchild had not only survived, but had grown wiser, stronger, and more resilient than anyone could have imagined. That evening, as the palace lights dimmed and the children slept, the princess and her human husband stood together on a balcony overlooking the gardens. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From a crash on an unknown planet, to survival and adaptation, to reunion and acceptance, the road had been long and difficult. But it had also been filled with love, courage, and hope. They did not know what the future held. Challenges would come. Not everyone would accept the children, not every system would understand their place. But they had each other, and they had the Queen's support. They had survived the impossible before, and they could do it again. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been. The princess looked up at the stars, feeling both worlds within her. She thought of Earth, of the humans who had helped her, and of the palace that had shaped her youth. She felt gratitude, sorrow, hope, and determination all at once. Her family was safe, her legacy intact, and the future open. For the first time in decades, she felt a deep sense of peace. The children stirred in their sleep, small hands stretching, smiles on their faces, even in dreams. The human man watched them quietly, protective and proud. The princess placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had endured together. And in that quiet moment, the palace itself seemed to breathe, as if recognizing the new era that had begun. Life continued with a rhythm of growth, learning, and love. The children thrived, the human man remained steadfast, and the princess guided them with wisdom and care. The queen, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now watched with hope, understanding that the family she had lost and feared gone forever was now whole. They were a bridge between worlds, a symbol of unity, and a living example of courage and resilience, and in the hearts of everyone who witnessed this reunion, there was a lesson that would endure. Love can overcome fear, courage can shape destiny, and even in the darkest times, hope can return.